Karen accused me of stealing my own car, tricked a dumb cop into arresting me. Now my car's a wreck because he gave her the key. I really don't care who believes, but here's my story. I live in one of those middle of nowhere desert towns where almost everyone knows almost everyone, and it's hot as hell, but dirt cheap to buy a home or land in. It's not uncommon for old cars to last out here as they almost never rust, and people keep fixing them. After high school, I worked my ass off at a local job to get my own plate. I ended up buying a small plot of land with a trailer on it off a local guy that decided he was going to move to Texas, and the guy also sold me his old Ford Escort prior to that. It was an okay first car, got me around well enough, still have it too. 10 years have gone by since then, and for a while I spent a lot of my time tinkering with an old 87 Monte Carlo that I bought super cheap as it was without an engine or transmission. I love that car, as an old cousin of mine had one when I was a kid and I always wanted one of my own. I spent 2 years fixing up the one I got with help from some friends and finished it in 2019. Since the engine was missing, I dropped in a junkyard Chevy 305 V8 that was connected to a rebuilt 4-speed automatic transmission with low miles from a totaled car. Then I painted it myself inside a friend's garage with a Harbor Freight sprayer and some GM black single-stage gloss paint and buffed it to a shine. And I finished it up with some gold Monte Carlo decals and some classic moon rims I bought from a local junkyard, polished it up. I also partially redid the interior by replacing the seats and putting a custom steering wheel. I'm not really a mechanic, but my friends all helped me. Online how-to videos on my smartphone really helped as well. The car was fun to drive and looked good, and I kept it in good order. That is, until this mess went down. Now, I didn't really trust some of the local law enforcement out here before, and this gave me even more reason not to. A lot of the cops around here are barely qualified for the job. They are practically hired with a handshake and just told to play Doom for training. Granted, though many of them are really nice. The sheriff is even kind of a friend of mine, but he's really one of the only competent ones there. Most of the rest really don't do their jobs very well, especially whenever a new one gets hired on. Like a guy that went out of his way to move to my town just to get to be a cop. In this case, he was the nephew of the sheriff. He even brought his own Crown Vic with the loudspeaker to drive around town in. Let's call this guy NC for nephew cop, since he was the sheriff's nephew. NC and I didn't know each other personally yet, but I was aware of him. He was dumb as a rock and high on his own ego. He was like Barney Fife and John Cena had an illegitimate son together because he was a tall, strong-looking man that was always giving people creepy looks and patrolled up and down Main Street with a clipboard in hand and a big grin on his face. He also liked to publicly flex his muscles in front of people. One Saturday morning, I took my Monte Carlo out to meet a friend, but they ended up bailing because of a last-minute issue with their girlfriend. I thought, meh, no problem. I'll just get some fast food and go home. I went to the local burger place and got a meal to go, and as I was walking out, there was a lady outside looking over my car. She was bent over in a very short skirt, and I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed the view. People would stop here and there to ask me about my car and where I got it. I usually don't mind talking so long as they are polite, though this woman ended up anything but. She was curvy and good looking while wearing a black miniskirt. I'm guessing early to mid 30s or so, not really sure. I asked her if she liked my car. She stood up, took one look at me and snickered. I asked her what was so funny. To get an idea of what I looked at the time, I was a skinny guy with a scraggly beard and was wearing a faded AC/DC shirt with the sleeves ripped off, along with worn out cut off denim shorts and flip-flops. I guess she figured I was poor or something, so she was probably judging my appearance. She looked me up and down in a very obvious way, and then said, "There's no way this is your car. You couldn't possibly afford something this nice." Now, I have a tendency to get sarcastic and snide when people make assumptions about me, so I said back, "Oh really, lady? The title is in my name, and these keys right here in my hand say I'm the owner too." The Karen just glared at me as I put the keys in the lock and began to open the door. I looked behind her and noticed a beige 90s Volvo with a missing headlight and had out-of-state plates on it parked not far from me. I put two and two together and laughed. "Let me guess, lady, that's your car over there?" She started to turn beet red. I laughed and said, "Oh, don't be ashamed. Those things are onlookers, but they'll run forever." I figured this was over, but as I was opening my car door, I suddenly felt her nails digging into my shoulder. She was screeching so loud my ears were hurting, and before I could turn around, she kicked me between my legs from behind with a high-heeled shoe so hard I collapsed in agony. And true to my luck, NC drove right up because he'd heard her screeching from down the street during his noon patrol. As soon as NC was out of his car, the Karen ran to him crying and said that I was a carjacker that was attempting to take her new car. I wasn't looking at either of them as I was on the ground wincing in a fetal position from the pain. The next thing I heard was NC yelling, "Put your hands behind your back." And then I was being pinned down by his knee on my spine and forcibly cuffed. I tried telling NC that I knew his uncle and can prove I'm the real owner of the car, but he called me white trash and told me to shut up. Then he picked my keys up off the ground and actually handed them to the Karen. Then he seemed to do a hero pose while she gave me a shit-eating grin. No matter what I said, NC wasn't listening to me because he fully believed her. And then I had to see Karen start up my car and drive off with it. My heart sank as I watched it sail down the road with her flipping me off. Then NC drove me back to the sheriff's office. I'd hope his uncle was in, but just my bad luck, he was out to lunch. So NC put me in the cell and told me to keep quiet. I was pissed, but I knew I wasn't going to make my situation any better, so I just waited. And during that time, NC kept giving me looks of contempt. At one time, he walked across the cell with a nightstick stick, grazing it against each bar like he was trying to intimidate me. At least an hour went by and the sheriff finally came in through the door, nursing a big gulp, but froze the second he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I was about to speak when NC jumped in and said, "I caught this lowlife creep trying to steal a lady's car, so I hauled him in." That's when I finally got my chance to speak and said, "Yeah? Only it was my car. The one you know I spent so long fixing up." NC just rolled his eyes and said not to listen to me, but the sheriff silenced him and asked my full story. As I tried to tell it, NC was making dismissive looks and kept repeatedly interrupting until the sheriff told him to sit down and shut up. Then when I was finally able to say everything that happened, he was furious. The sheriff laid into the NC, who was cowering in a chair like a little boy and saying that it indeed was my car, and he stupidly gave my keys to a thief that had assaulted me. NC started frantically apologizing, trying to say he was just trying to help, but the sheriff called him an idiot that just wanted to play hero by saving a damsel in distress, and now the whole department would be in hot water for his unlawful arrest and physical assault against me. Then he finally let me out of the cell. I got some ice for my crotch and got taken home. The sheriff and NC went back to their burger restaurant, but the Karen's car was no longer there. They got the CCTV footage from the camera the restaurant had looking outside. It caught everything minus the audio. The Karen came back riding piggyback with a guy on a motorcycle over a half hour from the time she left with my car. She blew him a kiss and then drove off in her Volvo. The sheriff scrambled everyone, even NC, to try and chase her down, but they couldn't find her as she'd already driven out of the county line. Some phone calls were made to other departments to look for her, and I had to sit at home with an ice pack in my crotch all evening waiting for news on what happened. A couple days later, my car was found just a few miles out of town. The Karen had broken all of the windows with what I'm assuming was the tire iron, and then put the car in neutral and let it coast down a deep rocky hill, which rolled it into the bottom ditch, which smashed the front end and warped the frame. It was completely totaled. I wanted to cry from the sound of metal grinding on rock as the tow truck pulled it back up. NC was there too, and he couldn't even look at me the entire time. My insurance also didn't want to cover the car, so the sheriff's office was made to pay me the value of the Monte Carlo instead, since NC let it happen, which was only about $5,000. Though that was honestly close to what I had put into it, since I did almost all the work by hand with the help of friends. NC also paid me another $2,000 for my trouble and said it was most of his savings. The Karen was caught at a motel a state over sometime later and arrested for soliciting prostitution and drug possession. Grand Theft Auto was just one of many things she was charged with. I got on a video call just to see her in court and testify. She looked like a wreck the whole time because she knew she was screwed, and it wasn't long before she was pronounced guilty. She got 10 years behind bars with no possibility of parole. As for the NC, the sheriff all but begged me not to sue him because he was his nephew, and he promised his sister he'd look out for the guy. I'm not a sue-happy person, so I let it go, provided NC actually takes some sort of course on how to properly do his job. And so the incident was more or less rug swept, and NC was demoted to sitting at a desk all day answering phones, and they would be docking part of his pay until every penny was paid back. He's still regulated to desk duty half of the time these days, and he still avoids me anytime I'm near him. Arguably, he's a better cop now though because he mellowed out. As for me, it took some time, but with help, I finally located a replacement Monte Carlo project car with a clean title, and it was the same year too. I salvaged as many parts as I could from my old one and used it all in the build. The engine and transmission were still good, and somehow, so were most of the base parts, and the sheriff personally came by to help my friends and I build the new car in his downtime. It took a year, but now I've got a fresh looking Monte Carlo that looks just like my old one. You never know they weren't the same car. I made sure to have better insurance this time around, and I'll be damned if I ever let a Karen near my car again. Man, what a terrible situation to have been put. Jealousy is one of the worst traits a person can have, and this Karen seems to be full of. She couldn't believe that you had a nice car than her, so she decided she wanted to steal your car by sucking up to the cop. The nephew cop did a horrendous job, and you are a bigger man than me for not suing him, as I believe he deserves to lose his job on the spot. He took her side without checking anything, and gave her the keys to your car, which in turn led to the damages caused. I'm glad you were able to get compensated, and I hope you don't come across someone so jealous again anytime soon. For some context, my grandfather is my dad's father. I never had much of a relationship with my dad, but I kept in touch with my grandpa over the years just to check in with him and see how he's doing. He's a Korean War veteran and at one point was a prominent member of his local American Legion, up until he was too old and weak to attend their weekly meeting. I assume meetings because despite being a member, I have no idea what goes on there. Family members are honorary members and I still get a new membership card each year in the mail. He's about to be 100 in just a couple months. He's aware of the situation with my mother and he has always regretted not pushing his son to fight for custody of my siblings and I when we were kids. My dad didn't want kids, and my mom just wanted us for the free money and child support. Recently, I got a call from my aunt who told me my grandpa had fallen and broken his hip, and he caught COVID at the rehab center that has now progressed into pneumonia. My aunt calls me every so often, and she loves to gossip about the drama in her side of the family, but the drama is now revolving around my grandfather. My grandfather had often met some shady characters at the American Legion, many of whom weren't even members, but their policy of never turning anyone away allowed for these people to come in hunting for an older person to take advantage of. One One of these people had been taking advantage of my grandpa for several years, taking money directly from his bank account and even taking out loans in my grandfather's name. My grandfather would hear about it, but this jerk, Dave, would convince my grandpa that the money was going to a new business venture or whatever scam he was cocking up and promised to pay my grandfather back. He was arrested for unrelated fraud charge. He was taking advantage of other elderly people. My grandfather never got the money back. My grandfather has a terrible habit of never saying no, and when he's stolen from, he just takes it in stride. My grandfather invested in companies that are huge now, but back in the day, they were small businesses, and over time, those stocks grew and my grandpa is now rich. Rich to the point he could lose a couple $100,000 and not even bat an eyelash. He was a very frugal man who never wasted anything and saved every penny he could to invest in those stocks. The issue I have now is that my grandfather's relatives were caught trying to break into my grandfather's house a few days ago. A neighbor called the police on them and they told the cops it was their right to go into the house because it belongs to them now that my grandfather's gonna die any time now. They were promptly told to leave and not come back. My aunt tells me they're calling the rehab center and demanding the keys to my grandfather's house so they can collect what is owed to them, which is absolutely nothing. They are my grandfather's nephews, so they aren't inheriting anything. My aunt, my grandpa's eldest, has already begun the process of getting a restraining order to keep them away from my grandfather and his home. As much as I want to be optimistic, I know the chances of him beating pneumonia are very low given his age, but it burns me up inside to know he isn't even passed and relatives are trying to steal from him. In case you were wondering, no, I'm not inheriting anything and I'm 100% okay with that. Further note, my grandmother passed away 9 years ago. My grandfather isn't aware of anything going on as far as I know, and that's for the best. I don't think he can handle the added stress. This is such a bad situation for your grandfather. He would expect all his family to be there for him and enjoy the time he has left, not trying to steal from him behind his back. They are exploiting the fact that he is so generous in letting things slide due to his old age. It's great that there are some in the family, like yourself and your eldest aunt, that are looking out for him, and I hope you can prevent him getting exploited any more than he has done already. EP tries to rob coffee shop over dropped donut. This happened in 2012, so all details may be a little foggy. I used to work at a famous coffee shop here in Canada. It was my first job that I'd worked at since I was 17, so at the time I had already been there for 2 going on 3 years. About 1 to 5 hours into the shift, this guy comes in, orders a coffee for himself and a donut and juice for his child. My partner working at the front with me picked up the donut and as he was putting it in the bag, dropped it on the floor. I did what every normal human being would do working fast food. I threw it away while my partner grabbed another. Apparently, this didn't bode well with the entitled father. He lost it, calling my partner an idiot for dropping it and began demanding that we fish the donut out of the garbage as it was a waste of food. Normally, I'd agree, but after a long shift and no one cleaning the floors by the cashier due to how busy it was, I wasn't about to give him a floor gunk donut. I told him that it is impossible. It's in the garbage and regardless of it being in there, I wasn't allowed to serve floor donuts to customers. That was fine. He paid for his food and left. Now, I was working front cash on evening shift. The previous shift was running ragged and couldn't do very much. As I said before, it was about 2 hours into our shift and cashes were just changed out, so I knew exactly what was in the cash register. Now, not many people pay for $6 worth of food with $20 bills. Most people that come by only use tens, or if it's a super large order, card. Why am I saying this? Well, the guy came back about 20 minutes after he initially left. This time, not for coffee. This time, he claimed I'd given him the wrong change. He said he'd given me a 20 and that I'd only given him the change for a 10. Oh, really? Well, let me check quickly, sir. If I did, that's my mistake. So I opened the register. Remember when I said cashes were only recently changed? Well, the way our manager does cashes, she put a specific amount of money in there based on what we got through most. 20s? Well, seeing how we basically never go through them, save the odd time, there was only 1 in the register. I told him that it's impossible for him to have given me a 20 as there was only 1 in the cash, which was the one the manager put in the cash when she changed them over. He didn't like this at all and left again. Normally, this would be the end, right? Nope. He came back a 3rd time, this time childless. It wasn't busy at this point, so we were doing chores while serving the odd customer. He walks up to the cashier. I look at my colleagues and walk up to them. What can I help you with, sir? Open your register and give me all your money. It was hard to keep my composure at this guy. He was weaponless, his child in the car waiting, so I chuckled and said to him, sure, let me just run that by my manager real quick. You'd think he'd leave, but no, he stayed. At this point, everyone recognizes the guy. My manager's pissed because she knows that he got back the right amount of money. He was told to get out, never come back. If you do, the cops will be called and will place charges for uttering threats. What a weird series of events, but I'm glad you managed to handle it like a champ. Now, what would you have done if he actually pulled out a gun? And I don't mean to be insensitive, but I can't help but notice you were overly confident that he didn't have a weapon. Maybe something to keep in mind for any similar situation you may find yourself in. Always put your safety first. Karen tries to steal solar panel and her son assaults me. I've been lucky with not encountering Karens up until recent. Honestly, I thought the internet over-exaggerated about these crazy entitled people. I came to the sad truth these people do exist, and my faith in humanity dropped just a tad more. Anyways, I work in the solar industry, mainly residential, as a service technician. Whenever something goes wrong with a solar PV system, I'm the guy they send out to fix it. I've been doing this long enough to have the knowledge and skill to complete an entire installation myself, with roof pitch and module count within reason that is. Anyways, I went out with one of my crews for an installation as they were short a few guys, so myself and two of the other technicians I work with volunteered to help them out. Seemed like a pretty standard job, 40 plus panels, not a steep roof. Okay, we should be in and out. Timing permitting, we're finished and back at the shop by 4 to 5 p.m. So we arrive at the house in what looked to be a pretty rich neighborhood. Homeowner greeted us and even offered to grab us all breakfast. It was a good day so far, so we set up an exclusion zone to prevent anyone from coming too close to the house as equipment, tools, etc. will fall off the roof. I'm on the ground working on building the electrical portion of the system. I've got my music playing. All is good. I've got myself in a good rhythm. I then noticed a child, could have been no older than 7, dart past the red tape we had put up and head toward a ladder to the roof and try to start playing on it. Like a human being with common sense, I ran over and told the kid he couldn't play on this and that red tape was up so he couldn't get hurt. And the moment you've all been waiting for, Karen appeared. Man, she had it all. The haircut, the sunglasses, and she had the worst spray tan I've personally seen. It's summer, people. Just go and get some sun. Damn. Karen, don't talk to my son like that. He just wants to play with your tools. I kindly tell her I can't allow him to play with our tools, and for everyone's safety, they both need to be outside the red tape. She then responds saying, "Oh, he'll be fine. Just tell your workers to not drop anything." This made me lose a couple brain cells before I could reply to this. I try to stay calm and let her know that I could tell them not to drop anything all day, but that doesn't exclude the fact accidents happen, and we cannot risk anyone who is a non-worker to be hurt. Karen, I can do as I please, and so can my son. We are friends with these people, and they let my son play in their yard. You should take a better direction at talking to potential customers, you know. This is where I started to lose my patience with her a little, so I explained the situation to her one more time, and again asked her to leave with her son. She grabbed her child's arms and stormed off, while also tearing off a section of the exclusion zone tape and storming off to her house 2 doors down. I stood by her trailer to take a breather and began chain smoke. I try not to get stressed out so much, being my job is already stressful as it is, but I have zero patience for people with no common sense, especially if they're a parent. A little while later, panels are prepared, roof is based out. We're now just finishing up the electrical before placing the panels into position. I'm running between the basement and the outside area. I get back outside, punching in some wires, when I hear one of my guys yelling from the roof, "Hey kid, what are you doing?" That immediately caught my attention as I thought the little kid had run past the exclusion zone tape once again. But my eyes caught a guy running down the street with a solar panel in tow. He thankfully wasn't very fast. I darted over to this kid with one of our solar panels and attempted to rip it from his hands while simultaneously trying to not let it hit the ground. I was able to get my hands on it, but this kid actually put up a fight and tossed a solar panel that put me in an awkward position, and he landed a full-on punch to my chest. Not gonna lie, it did knock the wind out of me a little. I went into full self-defense mode. The kid wanted to take another shot at me since I didn't completely go down. I immediately put him on the ground without throwing any punches. I didn't know how old this kid was, and I didn't want to get in trouble for hitting a minor, but I wasn't about to let this kid continue to hit me. I'm thankful I have a little background in amateur MMA, and a police officer dad and older brother who have taught me stuff over the years. So I had the kid down on the ground pinned, and out comes Karen running, screaming like a banshee. Typical, "I'm calling the cops," and "You just assaulted my son." I really asked myself if this was happening. Me, your son was stealing a solar panel and punched me in the chest. I had to defend myself. Karen, I told him to grab the solar panel. My neighbor said I could take one and try it out and see how I like it. At this point, my guys are at my aid, and I tell them to call the cops and keep Karen away from me. As we wait for the cops to show up, this orange-skinned lunatic is ranting how she's going to sue all of us and blah blah blah. Cops arrived about 10 minutes later. I removed myself from the kid, and the cops split us all up to take our statements and such. Karen went with her story about how her neighbor said she could borrow a solar panel and try it out. Now, even if he did say that, which he didn't, you can't just let someone take a solar panel because they still belong to the company. Most people who buy solar finance the panels and pay them off over the course of the next couple years. Works a lot like financing a car. It gets to the point where the cops ask if I want to press charges for the assault. The guy whose house we were installing had a security camera system and caught the incident all on tape, so I gladly said yes. No idea when the court proceedings are going to be taking place. I honestly just want this over and done with. Being put into this situation over something out of your hands is just not right, and there's no excuse for it. I don't understand why some parents feel like it's okay to let their kids interfere with people who are clearly working in an area that is clearly marked off. I really hope you get the outcome you deserve, and I'm sure you will, as thankfully, the security system should reveal everything you need. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check out the other videos on your screen right now. Otherwise, you're definitely the jerk.